is directed by James Mangold and stars Hugh Jackman again as Wolverine, and this is the second attempt to make a standalone Wolverine movie, a movie just about Wolverine, not about all the X-Men. This is actually another movie that is a standalone movie to Wolverine. So for the plot, I'm just going to say that this takes place back in modern times after we had the two prequels, X-Men Origins Wolverine, which didn't do so well, and X-Men First Class, which was a really good prequel, and this is back in modern times. This takes place after the original X-Men trilogy of movies. It takes place after The Last Stand, and this movie is basically about how Wolverine goes into hiding, and he's sort of doing nothing. He's basically just going through pain because he's tormented, because he killed Jean Grey in The Last Stand. He's basically tormented. He has nothing to live for. He's basically just living out in the woods. Wolverine is just out there going through so much pain. He wants to die, honestly. He hates being immortal because of all the pain he goes through because of how he killed Jean Grey. He has nothing to live for. But then, through certain circumstances, he meets somebody up who he used to know a long time ago, who he did something very good for, and a whole plot comes from that, and he has to protect this certain woman in this movie. And that's all I'm gonna say. So guys, The Wolverine is a movie I actually saw, like, I think around 2 years ago or so. I forget exactly when I saw it. I didn't see it when it came out the first time because I wasn't into movies as much back then. But I remember when I first saw this movie, I really enjoyed it because this is easily like 10 billion trillion times better than X-Men Origins Wolverine. This movie is actually a focused film with character moments and emotion and tension and a plot that you can actually easily follow and understand the character motivations in it. It's great! I love this movie. This is finally a movie that's able to be all about Wolverine and do it right, because we had X-Men Origins, which I already reviewed because I'm doing these 2 reviews leading up to Logan, and this is a movie that absolutely got the character right. This is a really great X-Men movie. Hugh Jackman is probably the best he's ever been as Wolverine in this movie. He is amazing in this film because of how much pain he goes through in his life. Basically, even though he's an invincible character who's immortal and he has these claws and he's all metal and stuff, he actually does have pain because he's been through tons of losses in the past and tons of bad things have happened to him over the decades that he's been around. He's lived for so long, seen so many things, gone through so many pains. So they take his past as the thing that hurts this character. He's a guy going through pain, wanting to be put out of his misery, and he is amazing in this movie. He's probably the best he's ever been as the Wolverine character. But that doesn't overshadow the other character of the girl he's trying to protect. I forget the character's name. She actually is really good in this movie. She is really good. He and her have a really touching relationship as the movie goes on because she basically gives him a reason to live again because he feels like he doesn't want to live, and she actually gives him a reason to keep on going, keep on being Wolverine, and it's great. It's so good. This is really a movie about a guy who's gone through so much pain and he finds a reason to want to exist in the world again. It's amazing. It's such a touching story. For most of the runtime throughout this movie, this basically is the Dark Knight of the X-Men series. This movie is very dark. It's very brutal. This is probably the most violent PG-13 movie I've ever seen. This movie is brutal. It is... They don't really hold back with this movie. It's very dark. It's very brutal. There's a lot of emotion in this movie. It's not as fun as the other X-Men movies because, like, a lot of the other X-Men movies have a balance of fun and emotion. And this movie is mainly just a dark character piece. It's a focused movie, unlike X-Men Origins Wolverine, where it had so many different plots that were hard to follow. This movie actually has a plot that you can follow and you can understand the character motivations in this movie. The action in this movie is actually fantastic. Like the original X-Men Origins Wolverine, the action is some of the worst action I've ever seen in a comic book film. The special effects, the action in this movie all look real. They look fantastic. The action in this movie is full of tension, especially because Wolverine is actually pretty vulnerable in this movie, and I love it. This movie never lets up, like, ever. This movie constantly, you just feel the tension and you feel the drive of the characters. This movie constantly, while you're watching it, you're just loving it because it's all great. I'm so glad that we were able to get James Mangold to direct this Wolverine movie and actually make a good Wolverine standalone movie because he did such a great job of making this movie almost as good as it could be. This movie is actually well shot and well directed. This movie is such a good return to form for the Wolverine character because he was just screwed up so much in X-Men Origins, and then this movie just fixed everything. And another thing I love about Wolverine is that this movie is not concerned with setting up other comic book movies, because a lot of the Marvel movies now, and a lot of movies like Fantastic and Amazing Spider-Man 2, just tried to set up other comic book movies. That was basically all they were trying to do. Remember the scene in Age of Ultron with Thor inside of the pool, and he's like doing that thing where he goes like, "Brah." That didn't feel like it needed to be in the movie, right? Right, because it didn't need to be in the movie. That's one of my problems with Age of Ultron. Way too obsessed with setting up other comic book films. And this movie isn't concerned with setting up other comic book movies. Yes, it has the ending that sets up Days of Future Past, but this movie is really just a story about Wolverine. You can watch Days of Future Past without having seen Wolverine, and you'll honestly get it. Even though if you are getting to the X-Men series, I do not encourage that, because I still feel like the Wolverine is a really good movie that you should check out. But my point is that you can watch the other X-Men movies and not have to watch the Wolverine in order to get them, because this movie stands on its own. It has its own plot that's not concerned with setting up other things. It's great! It's what most comic book movies nowadays should do. Through the majority of this movie until like the last 15 minutes, it's basically perfect. It's incredible. I love all of it. All of it is amazing, it's emotional, it never lets up, the action is amazing, it's tension-filled, but then when the last 15 minutes comes along, that's where my cons come in. The last like 15 minutes, the movie betrays itself a little bit, because like I said, this is a dark, gritty Wolverine movie with a lot of emotion and a lot of dark themes. And then when the climax comes along, there's a plot twist that was really obvious and really predictable, and there's an action scene that still has fun and it still has tension, but it really just betrayed the tone of the rest of the movie because it was really over the top, it was really silly, it actually felt like a comic book. But the thing I love about the rest of the movie is that it didn't feel like a comic book, it was serious, it was dark, and then when that climax came along, it really did betray the tone that they were trying to go for with this movie. And that plot twist was really predictable. I remember the first time I saw it, like earlier in the movie, way earlier than the plot twist actually happened, I was like, oh, that's gonna happen at the end of the movie, it's totally gonna happen, and it did. It was just like, I don't really like this very much. Besides that plot twist and the little tone shift in the last 15 minutes of this movie's great. I love this movie, and I'm gonna give the Wolverine a well-deserving A-. Guys, I obviously can't wait for Logan, that's why I reviewed these two movies. If you didn't check out my X-Men Origins Wolverine review with FilmFan059, be sure to check that out, because that was so much fun to do. I reviewed the bad Wolverine, and I reviewed the good Wolverine. Let's hope Logan is another one of those good Wolverine movies, and I'm sure it will be. Alright guys, I will see you in my Logan review. Bye-bye!